I thought I'd take a little time to discuss what is real about the movement of Trumpytune-Putinese that is being put upon all of us, and as usual, leaving me very much an odd man out. And I don't mean just because of my deafness. First, let's look at what people believe about Vladimir Putin. Putin is sort of the George Wallace of the era. He says, Ukraine now, Ukraine forever. He's not in the process of mending fences with people who hold him to account to United Nations ideas of human perfectibility. And there's an academic dialogue that goes on between the right and left wing about how legitimate Cold War hysteria towards various socialist governments really is. A couple of overly precocious, real hot dogs in places like Seattle or Pittsburgh get ahead of the game by um, finding outlets for the view that America is in the wrong, that the people in our schools teaching otherwise, and in media editorials are CIA assets. And this contributes to the idea that there might be some other explanation. Noam Chomsky is a place to turn for what Vladimir Putin is really up to. And Chomsky gives a good storyline. This guy does, you know. Basically, the idea that these people espouse, which is likely very true, is that Ukrainian neo-Nazi militias were snipering at the Orange Revolution, the Maidan Revolution, that the revolution against Yanukovych, the Russian elected president of the Ukraine, was a lot like January 6th insurrection, only it worked because it was in a foreign Congress. And the beneficiary was more to our liking in the United States. And that storyline credits Putin. Oliver Stone's interview played up on that storyline. So you have to assume that what you're hearing is all there is to hear. That when Oliver Stone met with Putin for a very long time on several occasions, everything they said to each other was caught on film and included in the director's cut. And frankly, knowing Oliver Stone, at least as distant well as I do, I've been published in film magazines about him and have had to cross paths with his scoundrel posses. I can tell you that such an idea is an absolute laugh. So, what's going on behind the scenes with these international figures? Well, there's some background to what happened, isn't there? Back in the days when Reagan was uniting fundamentalists around the world, and we got hit with the mysterious AIDS, and the British prog rockers were in place to sell mysteries and popular culture in order to support Reagan in the subcultural dominions of Warhol and Lenin, where there was a little bit of gunfire to lend a chapter to the Cyril Weck's Pursuit of Grave Secrets, which, of course, they deafened me and left me unrequited and as a reject in school, unable to finish college, working very hard to protect a few friends who couldn't work. And one of the things that they did was they passed around the notion of the inverted paradigm of honor being self sacrifice. There was a particular zombie leader named Fripp of King Crimson who was selling Gurdjieff and Ouspensky stuff, while David Bowie was selling plastic reality, which is appropriate. Because Ouspensky and plastic reality are basically the march of Hollywood, and the idea that Reagan didn't mean it when he laid a wreath at the Gestapo cemetery in Bitburg-Belsen. Or that all you hear, all that really went on between Fripp and Colin Powell, with his sister appearing for a few minutes on 60 Minutes with Colin Powell. Well, the idea came out in Piss Christ. Trumpytune got me interested in Islam because he pranced about Sufis. And I liked his music. And in fact, what little acceptance I had was because I was knowledgeable about King Crimson and the cult who were working with King Crimson on an agency to deafen me for Yoko Ono, who tortured me as a child. But I didn't realize that these people were actually behind what had happened to me until I was a little older. Was my acceptance rating was based on my knowledge of these people, my appreciation of these people. I had to like them to gain acceptance, and I did like them, and so they didn't murder me because I wanted to see how they could work the system of snuff films that using me for extermination bacon, essentially, which was their concept. Flippytune, I went to Islamic mysticism classes in Temple University and learned about people like Suarde. That one of the stories was the student would open his cloak. He was a Sufi, and it would all be filled. His hair would be all filled with gnats and insects, and he would laugh because of the mortification of the flesh. You see, Foucault met with the Ayatollah Khomeini based on something like that. The idea that you could find God through Sufism, through mortification of the flesh. And Foucault was a masochist who burned himself like a burning Buddha, in Saigon. He lit himself on fire with AIDS. So did Sean Strub, who was at the Dakota with Mark Chapman and John Lennon, that won a big night for Hollywood. And the kleptocrats in the NAACP hiding behind Trumpytune and all of this Ripper Hatter, remorseless murder ball, and pussy ball, Spike Lee, the Kremlinopolis of Columbia, UW Dialectical, believe that I have to back off claiming that Lennon and Reagan pulled a Houdini, and fall back to the idea that their Ripper Hatter mania is not legal. It's just mere provincial norm when you insult the Fuhrer. So, what we have, and of course, is just the question I'm taking to court is, does this union, these Nazis in Tacoma and Seattle and Pittsburgh, have the right to use me for extermination bacon? I mean, I don't know. That's why I'm going to court to find out, because they certainly have a dialogue of their licky chops sniveling going. And they will, of course, lie for their criminalopolis. And they tell me that I made a deal to lie for them. And if I don't lie for them, I will die. So, what we see with the Trumpytune-Putinese is that they can get as far as they can, daring you to say what is not true, that when they lie. So you see, What's not being told about is the way that Reagan and the NAACP and the Glasnost movement put together a sleight of hand to free Nelson Mandela in return for cooperation in the AIDS attack. And they had two versions, Pussy Boat, all red designated, ready to play out, when Maduro Goto would give tribute to Barack Obama. And Ringo Starr would work on the neuroplasm that impacted and weird science cult that they called rapid eye movement, which they said showed that the heartbeat of the unborn child leaves an awareness in the coupler to announce, while it appears the Houdini Svengali is claiming that virginity proves rape because their primary complainer was still a virgin after dating me for 2 years. And they wave all off they say neuroaggression was present. Well, it wasn't. It was dormant, but it doesn't matter to them because the REM comes from the heartbeat of the unborn child. So not that virginity proves rape, but that abortion is moral rape. And this is what they claim to be the nature of reality. Meanwhile, Russia has invaded Ukraine and lit granaries on fire. The tens of millions, 100 million people stand the chance of dying of starvation because of um, Putin's um, prom night spectacle. You know, when I say prom night, it's because central to what happened in the Ukraine was Beijing Olympics of 2022, where they put on a pussy riot, which explained what they were really doing, but there weren't many people who understood what they were really doing from their explanation, which is why I'm making this tape. It's an attempt to help you understand why Valieva was told to take fourth place and allow the Japanese to win the third. It symbolized the promotion of Maduro Goto in the Third World War, which was the AIDS attack Pussy Bowl operation that Obama engineered with David Geffen, promoting Gail Burson's moral pornographic genocide, the AIDS attack. And she was talking about the fourth way. And she said, at least they got their medals. Well, they had two medals in Henghei Pagoda Memorial Day for the American Legion. It's medals like my father had, two virgin symbolism. So the Chinese who allowed Putin to put on his believe a pussy riot in the Beijing Olympics were working with Trump's honor guard in the city of Seattle to second the statement that was made. And the years to which the Ouspensky Circle is putting their classic reflections on the confusion of man, the sort of thing that we easily get pulled into was, oh, there were Nazis, maybe Putin was justified, oh, the socialists know better, and oh, the academic field is full of liberals, they're confused, we need to crack down, the binarification, this side versus that side, the Cold War stuff. The confusion of man, it's the classic reflections of Ouspensky Circle. It doesn't mystify me, and the project certainly doesn't amuse me. It's a genocide project. But the intellectual heritage of this production has to be understood to be Putin, Reagan, Oliver Stone, Paul McCartney is really on top of this leapfrog oligarch crowd, and Queen Elizabeth. And it's Europe's revenge over America to pleasure Japan, with the Pussy Riot on parade. And that's the usual tragedy or travesty of Europe, trying to put America in its place. Now, Biden is a leader of NATO who was elected to the United States of America. But the bottom line is that this is NATO subverting America. The way they picked on me is Pittsburgh public school system. And the clever claim of Access Hollywood that came as a script from Israel, surreptitiously leering that what they were selling is what is real, and the law in Pittsburgh is just mere rubbish, was endorsed by parochials who see themselves from the beyond. The Ouspensky Circle in Pittsburgh met at the Catholic Synod, which is situated behind St. Paul's Cathedral, the cathedral spires of which reflect in the Software Engineering Institute, and the prime pedophile advocate for which is a Catholic worker. Child mutilation came scripted, built with counterclaims, lethal to question. The psychiatrist, the cheap hose, psychiatrists in Seattle who believe that you know anything they say has to be true, even if they don't. And they committed perjury on something they wrote about me. I mean, it's bad enough when they are attacking you with their forensic assertive tricks. And then to back it up, they commit perjury? Okay, well, believe it's Beijing Pussy Riot illustrated that the Beatles are behind what Putin is doing, just as a lookalike of Gail Burston appeared on the cover of some friends of Nunnan who lived in the Dakota with him. So he clearly pulled a Houdini. And they gave me a Pentagon Disney brochure that said there's no such thing as objective reality, only what the jury believes. In fact, a primary partner of John Schulman, who was arrested on an $8 million museum heist, wasn't just Trump speechwriter Adam Eisenstadt's friend, who I saw at his house, but also Ming Na Wen, who made the voice of Mullen, who was introduced to me by Michael Mullen, who's the name of an Admiral Mullen, when he went on to work with Oliver Stone. So, yeah, she was a primary custodian of what Schulman was doing. They were through her. I met her classmate in Lebanon with Cohen of Thomas O'Connor, who's owned the van that was driven recklessly at Kelly Elementary School. And he used to hang out with Schulman all the time, and the man who tortured me as a child from Artec. So the Beatles are behind what Putin is doing. It's a long plotted Eurogurchmonger, right? It's a fusion of the word oligarch and Europe, oligarch, Eurogurch, leapfrog movement, and of course, the parochial savage snivels at leers and shows me swastikas and calls them sacred African warrior symbols, but I oppose the rabbit's extermination drive, just as I oppose what it's calling a geriatricide. I have no idea whether they're going to get away with using me as extermination bacon. They poisoned me in the mouth in something they called tulip, but could put some horrible thing on my lip that gives me headaches now and stuff. It's rotting my gums. But the tulip revolution was a cycle of back and forth in Eurasian politics. The police are sort of victims because they were instructed by Obama to do one of these here to UW Dialectical's starlet of NEBA pornographic cinema, who was, hired by an attorney protected, strategic, very violent human trafficking pornography giant from Japan, for Braunstein McCartney. And they've been told to honor her testimony, right? Or the Proud Boys wouldn't take a bath with them or something. Probably there are invisible arguers who were impinging on what was happening in Pittsburgh. People wondered who's Curry arguing with when I went into the pit news desperately, like Randall Walsh. The courts are going to have to decide whether the union can lawfully use me as extermination bacon, because any evasion of the trust will be read as permission to. Cynicism in Pittsburgh, people have heard me laugh at the Fern Hollow gang. It's just because I'm sick of being told I'm afraid of people who attack a 98-pound child from behind. with blindside blows while armed. Okay, that's the Pittsburgh Penguins laugh at you. Cynicism is an ideology as powerful as an imagined community. Although I already know the attackers had secured the loyalty of their victims through the Piss Christ Shawarde anti-honor code, their demonstration model of saying Circe Kennedy's murder avenged JFK because of this starlet Andrea Swimmer from Neva Corporation, thusly proves the Warpro logic of Pitt News's Randall Walsh nature of reality formulas. I'm not really sure when Murderball got started. I'd have to think about that. But I can prove genocide porno, so it's fantasy prone of the British to sneer, as they do sneer. I cannot expect discussion about Pentagon Disney's brainwave sonar from Ultra High, for example, and therefore it proves that I am lying. But the truth is they announced that they could get to rape Deaf Genie and get to violate Circe because Genie had downs and because Leslie Katz was still a virgin. And that's the typical of their reasoning process. Really, the rabbit impacted a foaming Negro stereotype, the sort that D.W. Griffith used, only of the white, to militate the monger that virginity proves right. I mean, that's really Speedy Gonzalez jumping up and down. Virginity proves right, and King Crimson at their wildest. So Seattle psychiatry are a bunch of cheap hosts. There's nothing irrational or irresponsible about playing into a trap to prove a mass murder plot. People spend 20% of their time in conversation. That's the fact of linguistic anthropology. So when Pittsburgh goes around lisping, oh, we took his ears, and when the neuro suffocates him, we'll say he's unethical because the aerospace he's the man to man. And yeah, it's don't knock on our doors when we're conspiring stuff. So ultimately, what we see is that only someone as ignorant about Fripp would persist in denying how he targeted, used, entrapped, tortured, and subjected me to highly advanced, inhuman, and skillful trickery. Now, may very well be an element of neo-Nazi to it, but it's much bigger than neo-Nazi, and it includes Putin. Ouspensky worked with Prokofiev, Picasso, and Houdini, and now is being evoked by the Beatles' Trumpytune-Putinese for mass murder and sabotage. His Search of the Miraculous talks about in Moscow a disguised man. So we know, that they put a lot of premium on disguises, and the struggle of the magicians. Really, they considered that a ballet. This was fourth dimension stuff. Picasso was designing sets for Prokofiev, and these people were talking about building skyscrapers that channeled the fourth dimension to the subconscious of the masses. And they were fascinated by occult investigations. So what we see is a gratification of people the presumption that people invent miracles for themselves. So, when you see that UW Dialectical, which is a really loathsome group of people, studying like cigar smoking 10-year-olds selling kids in Singapore slums. They come up with NAMBLA child pimps in Pittsburgh, which isn't really that hard. There's violent kids carrying weapons all over Pittsburgh. And they managed to come up with a child, Madame. And this is they call a miracle of learning, and that they feel they have the right to evoke in using me for bacon, extermination bacon. And one of them named their band for the premature fornication with Didi Mancini when I was just a tot, Premiata Fornaria Marconi. Because this is the way they slur the whole thing. The Ouspensky two-tongue put in for the, well, the point is the Trumpytune-Putinese is a phenomenon that's real. It's a Ouspensky Circle of oligarchs. Like Melvin Belly was a state attorney for Hermann Goering, who we got on Hitler's yacht, and he beamed down from Star Trek, where he sometimes starred as a guest to George Takei, to represent Jack Ruby, who had the same psychiatrist as Charles Manson, who has virtually the same name as the snuff film pedophiles Manson, who Pittsburgh's government have murdered several Kennedys protecting.